I was thinking about this as we were starting the show here live on YouTube, of course, and on Spotify for those listening on audio. I was thinking, this would be the first time, at least in my lifetime, or at least in a long time, that we have had. Well, I mean, we've had the cultural playoff for 12 years, but the first time I can ever remember two programs who have not won a national title are going, or we are guaranteed to have themselves playing against each other. So it could be Indiana, it could be Ohio, or could be Indiana, Miami, could be Ole Miss, Indiana, any sort of combination. We are going to get a first-time national champion overall, whether it's head coach or I believe program, first time ever. Like I know, well, actual correction, Miami and Ole Miss have won one, but still, we're going to get a first-time national champion head coach. And I believe for at least the first time ever, we have ever had four teams that have had coaches that have never won a national championship before playing against each other, which is incredible. Not as assistant coaches, but as a pure head coach, never won one. This will be the first time. So we'll have a second year in a row at first timer winning a national championship. Well, actually, I'm thinking about it. Is it now 3 in a row? So Michigan, Ohio State. Yeah, it'll be 3 in a row. Yeah, 3. How about that? Of course, this is the Four Verticals podcast here live on YouTube, as usual, and on Spotify on this January 6th, 2026, high atop a beautiful, Chamber of Commerce, Jacksonville, Florida. You can see it behind the window here. I know it's glaring behind me, but trust me, if it wasn't the case, it's a beautiful day outside. Beautiful weather, not cold. Though I have it on good authority that this time next week, we do our show on Tuesday, it will be cold again. So enjoy the spring-like temperatures while you can. We do this show, if you're new here, we do this for all the new folks who come in, because we do know that a lot of folks do have tendency to come in, especially during the cultural playoff, which I'll highly advise you don't do that. You want to try to you guys come in earlier, but that's okay. That's all right. Just not my personal preference. But you do this show twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays around the same time. If you have to, we'll move things around accordingly. It's my shows. I can control it. But, busy show this week. Of course, at the semifinals, we'll predict those today. Dive into the transfer portal. A lot of things happening, a lot of movement, a lot of players starting to announce commitments to new schools or staying at their current school. And we also have thoughts, of course, on the Buccaneers season coming to an end, is what it is. We'll touch on that towards the end of the show. A couple of housekeeping rules. Again, if you're new here, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Even if you're a recurring viewer, make sure you are. Just double check. Because there's times where I've done it before where I thought, hey, I'm pretty sure I was subscribed to this channel or this show. And it turns out, I was not. So I didn't realize I wasn't subscribed. So make sure you do that. Also, be sure to follow us on X, social media, there, Instagram as well. We haven't posted a whole lot on Instagram yet. Still trying to figure out what we're going to do over there. But we'll figure something out. But and also follow us on Spotify as well. Audio, that's where we got started, by the way. We weren't on for a long time, but we're not on YouTube. But we were on Spotify since the beginning. Speaking of which, we'll do that in a second. And also, a couple of housekeeping rules here. More housekeeping rules. Sort of, I guess, new programming notes. Starting this year, and this is something that I've been thinking about for a while. We'll try this out for a little bit, but who knows, maybe we'll make this a permanent change. Like, the show's not going away, just to get out of the way. The show's not going away. We're not stopping doing shows, but I've got some feedback over the past few weeks or so of how the show's going, as you would once you get towards the end of the year, let alone, look, we're not like part of a corporation doesn't run our show, but we have fans who, give us some feedback and whatnot on how the show's going. And I've had some feedback. And just to be blunt, as serious as we can get here, as we're here live, my plan is, in this show, if you're new here, how would we do? We cover college football for the most part. We also talk about Marvel news, Star Wars news, and then we also talk about the Buccaneers and the NFL. That's my NFL team. I've gotten some feedback about the way the show's structured and how you can move some stuff around and maybe focus on one subject instead of having a whole ton of subjects, which I agree. I think when we started the show a couple years ago, which is, imagine saying that now, it's almost 2 years in, that when we started the show a couple years ago, I thought that the whole combination, sort of multiple subjects into one, I thought that would kind of work, but also knew to a certain extent it wasn't sustainable, that eventually we would have to either stick to one thing only and then move over stuff to a different show or to a different format. And I think at the moment, we're going to test this out. We're going to do some experimenting here. We're going to do that. So for right now, any Marvel content, any Star Wars news, any at least for that. Now the Buccaneers stuff we're keeping on the show. I think that can work out because it is football related. But the non-sports related stuff, that I think we're going to move that to the Four Verticals Extra Pod, which will be Spotify only. I know it sucks. Exactly, it won't be on YouTube. It won't garner a whole lot of traffic. But I think now, since we are in the spring, we have enough time to figure it out. And look, if there's any like big topics, like we'll still bring it up on the show with the non-football stuff. But after some of the feedback, I think what we're going to do is that we're going to select the college football as the main topic of the show, which has always been. Buccaneers will still be there. It'll just be where it usually is at the end of the show. But any non-football related stuff, the Marvel news and Star Wars news, that will be put into the Four Verticals podcast, which will be will be on Wednesdays. So I'll record that tomorrow. I'll give you my thoughts on what's been happening with both of those properties that we talk about. And those will be on Spotify. So that's why it's important now to be sure you guys subscribe to Spotify if you like that. And, of course, it'll be our typical Q&A, emptying our mailbag, questions about college ball and all the other stuff. But, yeah, that's where that stuff will be moving over. So if you're wondering, hey, why isn't he talking about, like, new Avengers Doomsday marketing stuff, why he's not talking about this or that in regards to other non-football stuff, that's where that's going. So it won't be a main staple on the show that much anymore. We'll bring it in once in a while, but it will be on the Four Verticals Extra Pod. We did that. We sort of kind of do that before the end of the year, before Christmas. We had that one episode that debuted a couple weeks ago. I think it's a juke change. It's not permanent. We'll just see how it goes. But I think to make things easier, we'll just dive into the non-football stuff. We'll keep that for the Four Verticals Extra Pod, which is our mailbag style pod. So if you want my thoughts on that for any of the non-football stuff, that's where it's going to go. So just make that clear here. So little housekeeping rules here before we get started here on the show. And before we do get started, I want to make sure you guys can hear me. As we've, if you're new here, as we've been known to do, we've had audio issues before. I believe everything's fine. Like the microphones are working fine on YouTube. Spotify, you guys should be fine. But just to make sure you guys can hear me. Okay, you guys can hear me. All right. Good. All right, let's get into it. We've been wasting 7 minutes or so. We need to get going here. We're not planning on being here for an hour, but we'll try. College football, semifinal predictions. Imagine telling yourself this as we pop the paper here, that we would get Indiana versus Oregon and Ole Miss versus Miami. Imagine telling yourself that 10 years ago. You could have believed Oregon. You could have maybe believed Miami or Ole Miss, but Indiana, I would have never thought in my lifetime. I've not been around that long, mind you. I've only been around for 23 years. That we would win this. In my lifetime, at least I would win this. Indiana, not in basketball, mind you, but in football, one win away from reaching the national title. I never would have thought that, but here we are. First game up, Oregon, Indiana. I believe this is in Atlanta for the Peach Bowl. It used to be the Chick-fil-A Bowl. Used to also be played in the former Georgia Dome, where I haven't actually been to before for like a Clemson-Auburn game back in like 2011 or something like that. So I've had the privilege of going there before, luckily. But yeah, they're up there in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. This will be, I believe, the Friday or Thursday. I believe this is the Friday game. So this will be on Friday, Oregon, Indiana. These two teams met each other back in Autzen Stadium in Eugene, back all the way in September or October. I don't remember. Good game, by the way. Indiana won that game 30-23. That was, of course, the first big win for Kirk City this year. And he had big wins last year, but that was the first, win or the first game where I think a lot of the country woke up to Indiana, up to including me. Of course, I'm a part of that. There's a lot of ways you can go in this game, but I think it's pretty simple. At least on the Indiana side of things. Like the Oregon side of things is a little bit different, which I'll get to in a second. But Indiana, their path here is pretty simple to win this game. They just need to be the best version of themselves, right? Their identity and their way, it's sort of, what Kirk Kennedy has installed up there in Bloomington is just like, and it makes sense, right? He's a Nick Saban disciple. He came from the staff there. He was there for like a couple years there in Tuscaloosa. He moved around as a coach. But his mentality, very, very similar to his early Saban, prime Saban era Bama teams where it's, run the football, game control, dominate on defense. Don't give your opponent any chance to come back in the game. Very rarely did it happen under Nick Saban in his prime years. Hasn't happened that much with Kirk anyway. Like when they lose, it's on them. Like instead of making mental errors, them, just getting outclassed. So and that happens very rarely with Indiana, especially this year. And that killer mentality they have, it's very hard to defeat that. Like Bama figure it out, Ohio State figure it out, Oregon figure it out, or they witnessed it up close earlier in the season. So it's very hard to, when teams like this get into those modes, it's very hard to stop. Like 2013 Florida State, probably the last team that we have ever seen do that. And they got tested, though, in the national championship game. And they also, I believe, gave up some points against Boston College earlier in the year. But still, I mean, that team had a killer instinct. Like when you faced them, it was, you shit your pants and you go and hide. Like very rarely did teams like Indiana get challenged to that certain extent. But they have, though, like not to say Indiana's imperfect, right? They had the Oregon games close. The Iowa game was sort of close. The Penn State game, though. The Penn State game. I told you guys this at the time it happened. Well, it didn't. It was an incredible finish. And yeah, you're playing a team that was sort of dead, but not really dead. Still a talented team at Penn State. I thought that win for Indiana, and much like a lot of others, I thought that was going to benefit them going forward. Like that was a good thing to get it out of their system. Hey, we had a close scare. Let's sort of bring us back down to reality. But knowing that we have that in us, that even if, once we get to the college football playoff and we start facing these other really talented teams, that we can, if we need to, in a close game, we have that mentality to take it from them and snatching the soul of our opponents, even in a close game. So that is important. But I think for Indiana, though, it's pretty simple. Again, it's ground control, running the football, dominating on defense. I feel very confident that they can do that. Now, for Oregon, a couple of things here with them, and I think the bigger scare with Oregon, at least with me, is their offense versus their defense. But the problem is infecting both, and I think most of you can kind of understand where I'm coming from here, or at least guess where I'm coming from. Now, this isn't exclusive to Oregon. Like Oregon, like what Oregon's dealing with is often like what Ole Miss is dealing with. Like literally having your head coach go take another job in your conference, and your staff is in a bit of chaos. But from that standpoint, that's even worse than what Oregon's dealing with. But what Oregon's dealing with is what most of college football is dealing with, which is staff turnover with coordinators, right? A&M was dealing with this, which is kind of why you saw what A&M produced against Miami back last month. And I think is also responsible for what you saw with Oregon versus Texas Tech, where, yes, he pitched a shutout, and yes, the numbers and stuff look good, but, Oregon couldn't run the football. They cannot. Like, they really had no success running the football. A lot of it was defense, special teams. So, and, I guess the counter argument you can make as well, even with the coordinator stuff of Will Stein leaving and Tosh DuPois leaving, Tosh DuPois, the defense was still good for Oregon, right? They shut out Texas Tech. They're right about that. But should I remind you that Dane Lanning is the chief engineer in a lot of ways for that defense? So even with DuPois leaving, the language isn't changing. Like you're not like the day-to-day operations on the defensive side of the football. Like Dane Lanning's been there before. Like Dane Lanning was a DC under Kirby Smart, and he worked with Nick Saban, so he knows the language and he knows how to do that. So the defense, even with the changes on the with the staff, with DuPois wearing both hats, that wasn't the problem, and I wasn't surprised by that. What I'm also not surprised by, but I'm more worried about, is the fact that Oregon's offense with Will Stein, he's hired by Kentucky, he's working 2 jobs now. Their offense wasn't that clean. It wasn't necessarily like a very clean operation there. Like it was, very sloppy. Again, you had some turnovers involved as well. I think for them to be competitive in this game, Oregon, I like they're like some trash team or not. They're still very talented. Like again, like they're like one of the like highest rated like blue chip ratio teams in the country. So I'm not saying they're priving of talent or they're starving for talent. I'm just saying the whole coaching staff dynamic, it's a real thing. And a lot of teams are dealing with it. Ole Miss is dealing with it. Albeit it's a little bit different, but Oregon's dealing with it for sure. A&M was dealing with it when they were hosting their home playoff game. But for Oregon, outside of the whole coordinator fiasco, this has to be Dante Moore's game. Like Dante Moore, I have trust in the kid. Obviously, like there's talk about, hey, will he or won't he leave? Probably is not leaving for the NFL draft. He'll probably be back next year. This has to be his game. Like sort of like Justin Fields in, what was it, 2020? In the semifinals during that crazy year. Justin Fields, a lot of folks were questioning him. Now, look, he hasn't panned out in the pro leagues, which is a totally different conversation. But in terms of, overall performances, like Justin Fields and that performance he had in 2020 in that playoff game against Clemson, one of the best performances I've ever seen from a quarterback, like, period. In terms of the college football playoff. Dante Moore needs that. Like, Dante Moore needs to, just go nuclear, right? And Oregon can do nuclear plays. They have the capability of hitting those nuclear plays. But the problem is, though, with the upheaval with your offensive staff, and maybe you'll get some receivers back. We're not sure. Guys who've been injured for a while. That's not a guarantee. And I fear that operation there may not be as clean, or maybe still clunky, and maybe the practices versus where they were back during the season have been kind of diminished a little bit, kind of being half-assed a little bit, which is understandable. Again, if you're Will Stein, it's like, you're working one job and you're working another one. It's not easy, man. I know a lot of folks can, do what I'm doing here and, talk to a camera and saying, oh, man, that's not that hard to do. Trust me, it's hard. So, yeah, that whole dynamic there with the coordinator, that really, especially on offense, that really bothers me. Defense, though, I'm not worried about it before. Again, the fact that Dave Lanning's a defensive-minded coach, I'm not too concerned about it. But I am with the offense. So let's look at the CFP Nerds model. We'll look at the FanDuel numbers. Then we'll move on to the actual pick. I'm going to type something in here into the notes here. There we go. The CFP Nerds model. Josh and Daniel over there at College Football Nerds. Now that they're not somewhat friends of the program, but we use their stuff. They're a good model to use. Their model, punch numbers in. They have Indiana minus 7.6, so just over a touchdown. According to their model. Now, the FanDuel line, according to FanDuel, not a sponsor of the show, just an asset we use for research, they have Indiana minus 3.5. Spoiler alert, same as the Miami game, but which we'll go over here in a minute. It's interesting there. The Miami, or that Indiana, according to the CFP Nerds model, they have them covering the game, at least winning more by a touchdown, which is not saying the game is a blowout. Like, that's, still a competitive game. I tend to agree. I think Indiana, based on their mentality and based on just the fact that staff continuity matters here, especially when you get to longer into the season, and with the way the current calendar is set up, I do not like Oregon's situation here. And look, Oregon could easily win the game, and they could, I'm sure if this show gets to number one, they'll probably put this in their their hype video and whatnot. But yeah, staff continuity matters. I just don't know with the situation, especially with Will Stein, the whole situation with him, him working two jobs. I just don't know if the staff continuity, I don't know if it's there or not, which makes me worry because Indiana, even with their stuff, they have injuries too. But again, that's just that killer mentality, that ability to, just play their game and to physically dominate you and to also mentally dominate you and psychologically will dominate you. I just worry it might be too much for Oregon. I think they will score in Indiana. I think this will be a way more competitive game than the Bama Rose Bowl game. But I think Indiana does win the game, and they win cover. But again, that's more in line with like winning, covering by 4 points over the 3.5 point spread. So yeah, I think it'll be a competitive game. But I just think Indiana is a better team right now, and that better staff continuity. And I think of Oregon, that's more of an issue that I don't think is being talked about a whole lot. So give me Indiana to win, giving them to cover, and they will advance. According to my pick, they will advance to the national championship for the first time ever. So how about that? Look, I could be wrong here. Oregon could easily win the game, and they figure it out somehow with Will Stein and this whole coordinator thing. And maybe, Dante Moore does have that, eureka moment where he goes off and has the best game of his career. That could easily happen here. So I'm just saving myself here. But I really do think this is Indiana's game here. It's pretty simple, at least in my opinion. Get some water real quick. We'll move on to the Fiesta Bowl, Ole Miss, Miami. Then we'll move on to the transfer portal. We'll finish up with the Bucs and their season ending. Again, by the way, as we are at the midway point of the show, kind of feels like it, 20 minutes in, be sure to subscribe to the channel, as I've been saying, and subscribe to the podcast feed. Again, we'll have our Four Verticals Extra Pod tomorrow. So be sure to keep an eye out for that. And of course, follow us on the socials: Instagram, X, Twitter. Be sure to follow us over there as well. Fiesta Bowl in Glendale, Arizona. Playing at the Cardinals Stadium, State Farm Stadium. Ole Miss, Miami. This will be the Thursday game, I believe, on ESPN. I believe this will be Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit calling the game. Then this matchup, and just to give you some perspective here, this matchup, just think about this. This matchup, Ole Miss, Miami, this could have very easily happened last year. This is a matchup that should have been last year, right? Based on the fact that he had Ole Miss last year going all in the portal, bringing guys like Walter Nolan and whatnot. And then Miami, Cam Ward, you went all in with him at quarterback from the portal, but it didn't happen. So this game, in my opinion, this matchup feels like it's like a kind of a year, like a little bit a year kind of late. But I don't know. It is really weird how these two teams last year, again, were all in last year, but it turns out their year to make it to the playoff was just the year after. It's kind of funny how college football works like that. I believe in this game that it's very simple, sort of like kind of strangely kind of like that Oregon and Indiana game. That I think the big stat here is he caught the paper again, Josh Pate style. It's pretty simple. Miami has the best defensive line, offensive line edge of all the teams in the playoff. I'm not saying they're the most talented team. I think that's Oregon, but the best D-line, offensive line combination, that's Miami, which is scary for any team, whether it's Indiana, obviously Ole Miss, Oregon, whoever, let's just say Miami were to win this game and they move on. That's scary. So for any of these teams, it's very scary that Miami has the best offensive and defensive line combination. Now, on the flip side, it's also pretty simple. Trinidad Chambliss has to be Superman here. Just talked about it with Dante Moore. Again, think about the best performances in the college football playoff, right? Deshaun Watson against Bama twice. Justin Fields against Clemson. Think about it. Like Tua in the national championship game in 2017, 2018. We've had big moments there where some of these quarterbacks, they just go off. And Trinidad Chambliss could be that. He had a Herculean effort against Georgia last week. I can emphasize that enough. He just on the throws he made, him running the football too. He's a very good runner as well. There's very few quarterbacks in college football within the last 15 years that can do that, right? Justin Fields, just mentioned him. Tua in college. I'm not talking about the pros. In college specifically, Trevor Lawrence did that a number of times at Clemson. Deshaun Watson. Of course, we had Johnny Manziel. In the past, Cam Newton, Jameis Winston, to a certain extent too, did that. Trinidad Chambliss has to be that. He has to be the reason why Ole Miss win this game, because I don't believe Ole Miss, how they're currently structured, will find the offensive line and the defensive line and hold up against Miami. I don't think they can do it. Okay, I just don't think they can do it. I'm not saying it won't be a close game. I just think that Miami will have easier time against them versus Ohio State, which I'm trying to see here. Again, look, Ohio State, purely when this thing first kicked off, they were the best team, period, in terms of overall talent. But then again, like I've been saying, Miami has the best D-line and offensive line combination. That was the difference in this game, and not to mention the turnovers and stuff like that. Obviously, we can't predict this, but just in general, like on paper here, this piece of paper, that's the difference in this game. Is Miami's D-line versus Miami's D-line, O-line versus Ole Miss's personnel, which I think that would heavily favor Miami. But in terms of quarterback matchup here, if we're looking at just comparing the two, which one is the better quarterback? It's the kid at Oxford, Trinidad Chambliss. And nothing against Carson Beck. Carson Beck has had a good year, but he's had his moments, right? The Louisville game, multiple turnovers. SMU, multiple turnovers. He has been turnover prone, even in the Florida State game back earlier, it's a long time ago. Turnover prone then. So, he's not been totally clean, but, he's been good for them, right? He showed up big last week. He had that, a couple of big runs late in that game against Ohio State. So he contributed. He's not like he's been a bum, but he's been turnover prone. But who isn't turnover prone in college football these days with the modern offenses? But Trinidad Chambliss, yeah, he's the big quarterback in this game here. That has to be the difference in this game for either team, whether it's him turning the football over or he just goes off like Justin Fields 2020 for Ohio State against Clemson. Like that is the standard here, in my opinion, for Ole Miss to win this game again. Because I just cannot emphasize this enough. I know it sounds like I'm repeating myself, but it's the truth. Again, I just don't think Ole Miss can hold up to them. If it was last year's Ole Miss team with their offensive line personnel and their D line, I would say, you know what? They have a good shot to win this game. I would actually probably pick them to win this game. But all those guys, like, speaking of Walter Nolan, he was playing in that stadium. They're playing that Thursday for the Cardinals in the NFL. So there is that. I don't know what to say here. Again, I think Miami, because of those abilities there on the lines of scrimmage, is kind of where I'm going to lean here. But I also do respect Trinidad Chambliss. I also respect that staff there in Oxford. Again, I know it's been really crazy with the coaching turnover and the whole fiasco of Lane Kiffin. Won't he leave? And he ends up leaving. And just so much confusion going on. It's a miracle. Again, I said this back on the show last week. It's a miracle that they've gone to where they are right now. The fact that they won last week and they did it with bubble gumming and paper clipping their way to it against Georgia. They did it. And, one thing about Miami, too, is that while their lines of scrimmage is the key to this game, which is why I'm going to lean toward picking them, like a spoiler here, this is the best quarterback they've faced all year. And Trinidad can do some stuff that, frankly, Tommy Castellanos couldn't do, that, who's kicked from SMU? Jennings couldn't do, who quarterback for Louisville. He's escaping me. I think it's, Louisville, the quarterback for Louisville this year for Jeff Brom. Even CJ Carr for Notre Dame, who did some good stuff, but just, wasn't enough. Trinidad Chambliss is a different cat. So this will be the best quarterback they would have faced all year. And then you could say the same thing about the next game, too. Let's look at the model here. CFP Nerds model. Look at the FanDuel number. Again, the FanDuel number, same as the previous game we just looked at, the Indiana-Oregon game, 3.5 towards Miami. The CFP Nerds, their model has it Miami minus 7.7. It's very similar here. They have them covering just a little bit. And I agree. Miami wins the game outright. I think they cover. So right in line with the model, I agree with it. There's not much to say here. Again, I just feel like Miami, in terms of the personnel on the lines of scrimmage, will be the difference here. But if Ole Miss were to pull this off, man, it has to be Trinidad Chambliss, and those receivers have to step up. And I don't think, by the way, they can win the game by running the football with the running backs. I just don't expect them to run the ball that well, given how a lot of teams just haven't done it against Miami. Now, the other key here for Miami, or for Ole Miss here to be able to win this game, is, of course, turnovers, right? Again, we've talked about Carson Beck being turnover prone. You can't predict it, but just from a general standpoint, that's something to just be aware of, that can happen at any moment, right? So that is something to consider. But, yeah, I'm picking Miami to win the game outright. I think they cover. I'm not expecting it to be a blowout. This should be a close game, right in line with their model. So give me Miami to win. And how about that? I'm predicting Miami and Indiana, the national championship game. Who's going to thought that back in the summer? Certainly not me, because I didn't pick that. Transfer portal on fire. News today. A lot of big names moving around. A lot of names still undecided. Big names, by the way. Huge names undecided. Multiple numbers here. We're looking at 247's list here. A lot of names still not necessarily filled up yet. A lot of big names, especially at quarterback, undecided. Like, for example, Jalen Raiola, still out there. But some notable ones here I wanted to mention, especially the ones who have committed to the school. Texas, they lost Parker Livingstone to the portal. Where is he going? Well, he's staying in the SEC, but he's going to the other side of the Red River rivalry. He is going to Oklahoma. Parker Livingstone to Oklahoma. Very odd. Very, very odd. If I'm a Texas fan or an Oklahoma fan, that you're getting a player from the other side of that rivalry to come over to the rival school. Very odd. But, good receiver for them, obviously. John Mateer back next year. They're cheating to see year 2. Him and Ben Arbuckle. Easy for me to say. Him and Ben Arbuckle, year 2, but Parker Livingstone, pretty good receiver, very reliable for Texas this year. Of course, the staff in OU and Norman knows who he is, so of course they would try to get him and one up themselves in the rivalry. But yeah, he's going to OU. How about that? Also, big news for Auburn here. Byron Brown, USF quarterback, following his coach Alex Galesh to Auburn. I want to pause here a little bit to kind of talk about this. This is a good get for Auburn. Like, Byron Brown, paper pop here, was, I believe, the only quarterback to throw for 3,000 yards and rushed for almost 1,000 yards last year. Like, he was very dynamic. And I know a lot of folks will make the joke saying, "Oh, he's only following his coach and wouldn't have left to go elsewhere if he didn't." I disagree with that. Like, a lot of folks who I've listened to, like, for example, Todd Luganville, he was on with the guys over in Birmingham with an extra on live, Dunaway and all of them. He was on with them. He was saying, look, he's heard the same stuff. He was saying, look, it doesn't matter whether Alex Galesh was at Auburn or not. Byron Brown would have been highly coveted by any school. And Auburn just, happened to get their coach, the coach himself, Florida, and that's where he decided to go. Like, Byron Brown could have gone anywhere, right? Could have gone to Tennessee because he's familiar with that system because it's the same system. Could have gone to LSU with Lane Kiffin, same system. Could have gone anywhere, as I'm trying to say. Could have gone anywhere in the country, all over creation. And heck, he could have even gone to the NFL. That was also a possibility, but he chose to stay in college every year. So he's at Auburn now. Now, like I mentioned on Friday, and I know I sounded very alarmist with Auburn. I still feel that way, but I guess getting Byron Brown is a good mini sigh of relief, but still. My thoughts still remain about the fact that you need to bolster this roster because it is, without a doubt. I know a lot of folks will try to sugarcoat it. This is a roster rebuild. No doubt. It's a roster rebuild. It's not a program rebuild necessarily because I think certain structures are in place still, but it's a roster rebuild. Like, you've lost so much talent, especially at receiver, to the portal that is irreplaceable. Like Cam Coleman, talk about him here in a moment. He is irreplaceable. He is a guy that, not to sound like Chris Collinsworth from NBC, he is someone that you can't replace in the portal. You just can't. Like, you can get decent receivers. And look, like I said before, thankfully this offense you're going to be running at Auburn, the veer and shoot, Baylor Brile stuff. You don't need elite receivers to run this offense, which is good, but in terms of like a talent standpoint, like roster building and like the blue chip ratio, this hurts, man. This really does hurt. And I know a lot of folks up there in Auburn, I would imagine they somewhat care about that, but I also understand, or at least I understand too, that they also believe, hey, we don't need blue chippers to run this offense to make it work. So, look, if they can get decent enough talent into Auburn, I'll be fine with it. But if they can't and they whiff on some guys who are decently talented, next year could be rough, especially with that schedule. But trying to sound less alarmed as I was last week, but still, some concern, and I think it's warranted, right? You're losing all this talent. You should be concerned if you're an Auburn fan. But getting Byron Brown, though, that's pretty important there. You get someone who's familiar with that system. Granted, from what I've heard, it's not that hard to learn the actual veer and shoot stuff, but it is nice to have a quote-unquote an adult in the room, in the quarterback room there, which it's decimated. He's only have like 2 guys from South Florida. So it is good to have someone who is known, who is familiar with that system there, and obviously assuming he'll be the starter. Speaking of guys from Florida retaining Jaden Baugh. He was in the portal. He's back in. He announced his return. Huge for John Simron Company. Huge for them. They really need certain parts of that roster to be retained. That's one of them. I think DJ Lagway will touch on where he could go. Potentially. I don't think they're really shedding a tear over certain guys like him. I think getting someone like Jaden Baugh is a huge deal for them. So he is back. Now, speaking of weird, Austin Simmons, former Ole Miss starter who got silently benched and also got injured early on at the beginning of the year, he entered the portal and he's moving on to Missouri. So good pickup for Coach Drinking Company. Of course, they lose Bo Pribula, and like a lot of that roster is leaving, but there's some pieces there for next year. It could be a decent team next year, especially with Austin Simmons, and hopefully he can cut down on the turnovers. But it should be noted though that he will be staying on with Ole Miss until after the season's concluded. So he'll be, on the sidelines on Thursday of it. But if it ends or whatnot, continues on, he'll either stay or leave. So he is still an active roster, but he will not be playing for them next year. Now, speaking of Cam Coleman, of course, he has left Auburn. Massive hole for them to fill there at wide receiver. Regardless of whether or not they need talent to run that offense, it still hurts, man. It does hurt, and it's a shame. But Coleman, Texas Tech, likely the place for him. He should be visiting them tomorrow. I think he's going to go there. And part of it's the money. Part of it, too, is the ability to, have some assurance at quarterback, because I believe is it Thorsby, the quarterback there, I think. Yeah, Brendan Thorsby, who was at Cincinnati. He's a very good quarterback. He was like the second-rated quarterback behind Sam Leavitt. He is going to Texas Tech, so he's going in conference. That's appealing for someone like Cam Coleman to play with. And he, Sorsby's a really good player. He could be sort of in a lot of ways like Fernando Mendoza this year. He could be, in those circles of being a top 10 draft pick next year. That's huge. So if I'm Cam Coleman, I'm going to go to a place where I know for sure I'm going to a quarterback who can give me the football. Not saying Byron Brown's a bum or he's stupid. He's not. But it just, I get it. And that's something that, Bud Elliott used. He used this back when, I believe it was on his show with the recruiting guy. I believe Andrew Ivins, I believe that's who it is for CBS Sports, on his show on Cover 3, and they talked about, the Hugh Freeze firing and who could move on. Bud brought up, Calvin Johnson back in the early 2000s at Georgia Tech, and he had Reggie Ball throwing the ball to him, and trying to do a pun there, but he had a fairly average quarterback throwing the ball to him, and if you place Calvin Johnson on those early 2000s Miami teams or like Ohio State, for example, he would have gone 1-1. He wasn't the first overall pick in that draft he went into instead of going 10th or whatever. So if Cam Coleman, you want to go to a place to where who's getting in the football and who is actually a known commodity to be a good quarterback. And nothing against Byron Brown, but if Cam Coleman was at Auburn, I don't know if I would have been over the moon about Byron Brown being the quarterback who's throwing the ball to you versus someone like a Brandon Sorsby who is more known and more of a higher thought of commodity in the quarterback space for the NFL. So again, nothing against Byron Brown. Is just for Cam Coleman. I get it. You want some assurance at quarterback. You want someone who is actually going to be a good enough prospect. And not to mention Texas Tech has a lot of money. Obviously, with Cody Campbell. So I think Texas Tech with Cam Coleman is very likely. Of course, they've done this before. They had, several big name receivers who were in the portal last year. And they got them. I think one of them left or whatever. It was very weird, but they've done this before, is what I'm trying to say. Now, as of DJ Lagway, we don't know where he's going yet. He visited Florida State. Now, Florida State did get Ashton Daniels, so it's kind of, hey, maybe they're moving on from him. Now, for Lagway, of course, Louisville's still involved. Cincinnati could be involved here. With Lagway and Florida State, would have worked out if he actually is going to go there or if he's not anymore. Would have worked out. I don't know. I mean, I was reading some of Bud Elliott's stuff because he, follows Florida State. Obviously, he's a Florida State alum. He follows them very closely. Kind of agree with him that if he ended up going to Florida State with Gus Malzahn, who was, I guess, coming back, which was news to me, would have been a weird, not a bad fit, but a weird fit. It would have worked, but it kind of would have been that same kind of Jeremy Johnson type fit where it's I don't know, DJ can run, but he's not this athletic, pure runner guy that Malzahn's offense is traditionally used. Now look, Cam Newton was a very, odd example, right? It turned out to be very, very good for them, but very odd fit, kind of like DJ Lagway, but it turned out to be very, very good. So, look, it could have worked out or could work out. I mean, I don't know for sure if he's still in play for Florida State, based on the fact that you got Auburn's Ashton Daniels, who is way more of a pure runner than DJ Lagway. I would suggest Ashton Daniels is probably going to be your QB1 there for Mike Norvell and company, so we'll see. Speaking of QB fiascos, and we'll move on here to the last topic of the show. Kenny Minchey. Thought he was going to Nebraska. Seems a good fit. Of course, he is the former Notre Dame quarterback. Nope. Pepper Pop. He is going to Kentucky with Will Stein. Speaking of Will Stein earlier. Going to Kentucky. Good fit, I guess. I don't know how it would work out. Using the old Tom Fornelli coaching search tagline there, the slogan. It could work out well. Minchey, he probably does fit the Will Stein offense. Will be interesting to see how it works out there. Of course, Kentucky had to re-overhaul, or not. I don't even know if that's even a word. Overhaul the entire offensive roster and whatnot. So, yeah, that's obviously it's a big rebuild up there. That whole offense there with Kentucky during the Stoops era towards the end there was a huge mess. They need some help there. So good to get a good quarterback. Now, the last few ones who were transfers, besides Will Levis, at least in the college level, have not worked out. So hopefully this one's a charm. But, yeah, thought he was going to Nebraska. Not anymore. So I don't know there. We'll see what Matt Rule does here. If he goes after DJ Lagway, he goes a different direction, who knows. But, yeah, there are still a lot of names, too, that are not not settled yet, right? John Raylor, still out there. New Snipe, still out there. Several other names. Bo Pribula, still out there. Aiden Childs, remember him a couple years ago at Oregon State? The Whoopsie Daisy King over the past couple years. He's still available. So, hey, Matt Rule, that could be a possibility. Maybe Auburn as well. Could be an interesting spot there. I don't know if he really fits at offense, but, hey, we'll see. But the current portal rankings here, I believe these are the portal rankings. Yeah, transfer rankings. So Penn State's #1 current class. Oklahoma State's #2. And now part of that's because, the portal still, a lot of names are still to be determined. But they did get North Texas's quarterback there, Musselmaker. Indiana's at 3. OU at 4, Ole Miss at 5, 6 Kentucky, 7 Texas Tech, Auburn's at 8, Wisconsin at 9. Interesting. Then LSU at 10 with Lane Kiffin there. But I'll just say this too: with a lot of these college football playoff teams, their guys are also still eligible to go in the portal as well. And once we see some of the results later this week, and more names will enter the portal. I'll just say that a lot of names will be entering in, so just keep an eye out for that as well. For the portal. But yeah, that's how it's stakes out right now. A lot of names you still don't know. A lot of answers, or a lot of things are starting to get cleared out here. But still a lot of big names we still don't know yet. But I guarantee you, once I do that for the extra pod tomorrow, I guarantee you we'll have a lot more clarity here. What's going on with the portal? All right, Buccaneers Panthers. Bucs won the game 14-16. That's not really relevant anymore. Good to get the final game of the season, as it turns out now. By the way, too, final game for Gene Deckerhoff, the former voice of the Florida State Seminoles. He retired a couple years ago. Gene has been the voice of Tampa as well for a long time, for much of my lifetime. He's retiring. I know there was rumors a couple years ago he was, but he kind of cooled those down a little bit. He's officially retired, so good for him to go out on a win. But unfortunately, the season's over because the actual NFC Championship game for the NFC South Championship game was in Atlanta, with the Falcons and the Saints. Essentially, like I said on Twitter and on the show last week, was essentially going to be an extension of that Bucs-Panthers game. Well, basically, the team, like if the Bucs-Panthers game added on 4 more quarters, that's what the game would have been, especially if Tampa won, which ended up doing. So that meant, of course, that Saints-Falcons game was basically the Tampa-Panthers game with 4 more quarters. Just the teams are different, essentially. So, yeah, the Falcons won the game. And the season's over. The Buccaneers are done. It was a very dreadful year, especially how it started, and it kind of went off the rails there. And starting in November and after Halloween, and did not get that much better. It was very, 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 very sad way to end the season, in a season that started off with so much hope. Right, the comeback wins, the season 2 start, and Baker was playing pretty well. There's a lot of things went bad. Of course, defense is bad. Secondary was really, really bad outside of Antoine Whitfield. No pass rush either. Offense, I mean, inconsistency, injuries. Baker, as of late, was turned the ball over a lot. He turned it over again in the season finale on Saturday. So, I mean, look, there's a lot of things to wonder here with Tampa going forward, right? Who's come back, who's not. Rashard White, the running back who was the solid number 2 for the last few years for Tampa, he is gone. He is testing free agency. He is not coming back. So that's a huge loss there for Tampa. Huge loss for Todd Bowles and company, who is at the moment he's being brought back. So that's a whole other conversation we'll get into in the coming days. But yeah, so he is gone. Rashard White's gone. That was Rashard, not Todd Bowles, but Rashard White is gone. He is gone in free agency. Mike Evans, Levante David, sort of the big stalwarts here of the team, the longest tenured Buccaneers on the team. Their futures are unknown. It looks like Levante's probably going to retire. I'm assuming they'll be announced by the end of the week. It certainly looks like, after that game concluded on Saturday, that he was finished. So we'll see when the official announcement comes out. Heck, it could have been announced now, and I just haven't seen it yet because I'm doing my show live. I should probably go ahead and check real quick. But yeah, I don't believe it's been announced yet, but they very much so could have. Let's see here, go to my Twitter here, just to make sure I haven't missed anything. I don't think I have, but who knows with the way social media is like these days, both in the world of sports and both not. Yeah, it doesn't seem like anything has really transpired at all that much in terms of any news in terms of Bucs fans wondering, who is leaving and who's not, or retiring or not. But yeah, so far nothing new. But yeah, those we don't know yet. I mean, Mike Evans, he could be back next year, but I mean, very unlikely. I think he probably won't be back next year. Same with Levante, and will be, other guys will probably move on, right? Several people who are players who are free agents, don't want them to come back. They'll probably test the waters, along with Rashard White. So now, as for Todd Bowles, I mean, look, I thought yesterday. We'll see if he gets fired. Of course, yesterday was Black Monday in the NFL. Of course, Raheem Morris got fired. The only NFC South head coach to get fired. Bulls has come back. Now the expectation is that like Josh Gizer will be back, but that whole defensive staff there is going to get cleaned out. There'll be some massive changes. Maybe you'll hire a DC. I don't know for sure. At least I would, but probably not. More likely major staff changes in terms of position coaches and whatnot. Getting some younger faces in there. Maybe going harder in free agency. Maybe proposing some trades and whatnot. And obviously have the draft coming up. But yeah, Todd Bowles looks like right now, unless he ends up retiring, will be back as head coach next year. And next year could be probably for the first time since the Dakota years. It could be a rough year next year for Tampa. Like their opponents, we know who they are going to be. Like, for example, the Chargers, we know for sure will play next year. They'll come to Raymond James. I don't know, man. It's we have long ways to go here because with the offseason now starting for the NFL for a lot of teams. And of course, the draft coming up in April in a few months. So won't talk about Tampa a whole lot, and we'll talk about it in the extra pod. But at least on the big show, like next time you'll hear from me about them is either coaching changes, they happen, and the draft. So there was that. So they're on the way to Cancun now. They can relax and enjoy and the off season or however that's going to look like. And of course, we'll have the futures of certain high-profile Buccaneers still up in the air right now, but more likely some news there coming very shortly. And that's the show. How about that? Under 15 minutes, it looks like. So again, the Four Verticals Extra Pod is back tomorrow. We'll be doing those on Thursday, on Wednesdays going forward. I'll be recording those in the afternoon. So be on the lookout for that on the podcast feed. Of course, I'll have the show back on Thursday. Now, we might do a reaction on maybe Friday night to the playoff game. So we'll keep an eye on that. Or either, actually, honestly, both. So we'll keep an eye on those. We'll have those as individual videos on the channel. Because by the time we get to this time next week, the game's already been finished. So be on the lookout for individual videos there, or maybe even just emergency streams. Who knows, late in the night for both of those games. But keep an eye on for those. But yeah, we'll have a normal show Thursday. I don't know what we'll do Thursday. Who knows? We might. Honestly, I'm trying to think. I don't think we've actually revisited our spicy predictions yet. We may have briefly. I'll have to double check on that. But yeah, I don't think we have officially yet. But if we did, we'll just redo them and whatnot. Officially, but I don't have to go through the archives. I don't think we have or not. Maybe we did, but more likely I don't think we did. So we'll start that. We usually do that around this time of the year, so we'll either restart it or continue it. I don't remember for sure if we have or not, but yeah. So until Thursday again, we'll have the extra pod tomorrow. They'll be in your podcast feeds tomorrow on Spotify or I think just only Spotify. So be sure if you're a listener over there, keep an eye out for that. So until Thursday, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, Wednesday. Until then, take care, and we'll see you guys on the next stream.